All right. We're going to react to this real quick. Let me mute my game sound. Channel manager Coach Mills sent it to me. It's called Acceleration Broke Overwatch by Ralph. So let's check this out. Season 9. Let's go.
I think the weirdest quirk of Overwatch is that the most important and defining feature of the game is possibly the least noticeable and innocent factor possible. It genuinely could have been one of the most costly blunders ever in the design of the game. Blizzard seems to agree because they've implemented what is most likely the biggest overhaul in the history of Overwatch, and at least half of the changes appear to have been made specifically to tackle this one issue. There's a popular phrase in the community that's really relevant here. Overwatch is the hardest game to aim in, but it's a game where aim matters the least.
I need healing.
I mean, this is just, okay. This is just because they put in these tiny ass characters with better dual potential than the DPS. Like, Overwatch used to be rewarding for the aim, and I think I don't think anybody, like, aim wasn't everything, but like it was still rewarding until they started adding the MOs to where they just made the good shots not even matter and the DPS role irrelevant. But like I will agree that, like, in terms of tracking and how players strafe, Overwatch definitely was a little bit harder than, like, say, Call of Duty, right? But that's also what made it special for a lot of people too. But yeah, so Overwatch is definitely a difficult game to aim in, but it got worse and worse when they kept putting Kiri in the game and shit like that.
It's very simply acceleration. We're not talking about movement abilities or buttons here, we're talking about the bedrock. Changing from left to right happens almost instantly in Overwatch, and I can't overstate this is incredibly rare in FPS games. The way most games work is they have a ramping climb to max speed after changing directions, but some games have a massive slowdown on shooting which locks you into fights. Some games have momentum based systems like bunny hopping, where changing direction is almost never a good idea. In all of these cases, however, the movement plays a major part in defining the game genre and feel. There's not been a single mention I can find in the entire internet all the way back to the game's launch where the team discusses this, until last week. Before now, I didn't even think it might have been on their radar, but this may be the most positive change ever for the game. So why is this system good? Why is it bad? What problems has it caused? Why do we even have it in the first place?
We'll see about that one, won't we?
And how has Blizzard fixed it? If you've ever given a game to a parent before, you know that some people who've never picked up a controller can be excluded from playing a game simply because they couldn't stop looking at the roof or the floor. There is a low level of base competency one has to reach in order to play any game, and this is normally the level where you can use the control scheme to the point where you won't be simply just frustrated by it and self-select yourself out of the user base by finding something else to do. This skill floor comes coupled with a skill ceiling, which is the maximum skill expression which still nets you a reward once you've mastered the system in question. Fortnite, for example, is the prime example of perceived and actual skill floor being slowly raised over time by people's adoption and perfection of building mechanics. Overwatch's movement system being designed around almost instant acceleration really helped to present side up to the customer a low flawed, easy to understand system, and really helped the onboarding into the game of non-FPS players. On the game's release, the media and general community reacted massively positively to this movement system, and it creates an incredibly tight feeling with, like, instant feedback from every button press.
Yeah, it feels good.
Responsive and satisfying.
It feels
movement.
great.
It just kind of feels
like the responsiveness of Overwatch as a shooter is what made it, like, feel so good, and it won Game of the Year because of this stuff. Like, it felt great to play. If his conclusion is gonna be that acceleration is what broke Overwatch, that's just not really true. Like, the feedback, like, that, well, we'll let him explain what he's saying, but because I don't want to jump to a conclusion here, ironically, but yeah, like, that responsiveness and, like, in the engine of Overwatch from each character with your movement, like, everything felt so much in your control, and that gave players agency over what they were doing, and it just felt good all around. It just felt really good all around, and you could actually go make plays and make things happen, and that's what made the game special.
Good to exist in Overwatch. In addition, because of the high acceleration, AD spamming, or general movement tech and hitbox manipulation, is incredibly common as a strategy to increase survivability. An AD strafing tracer,
it added a new
for
skill set
example,
to the game.
has a certain cadence to get from the left to right strafing animation, where her head hitbox will have the largest amount of movement. But this is a predictable movement pattern, so as you get better, you have to mix up with short strafes, long strafes, crouches, and pauses. Even in the simplest case, small adjustments.
It's a big part of the game.
Instead of being stationary, really up your survivability. Despite it being really concealed from direct view of the customer, learning movement tech is a really long-term engaging skill to learn.
Yes.
It really heightens the skill ceiling of Overwatch.
Yes,
All of this is obviously an almost perfect example of good design.
I've never talked about this, chat. I think my weakest attribute as a player was my movement. Like, I got a lot of the other stuff right, but like when I was playing in contenders, like one of the things I felt like I was lacking was like predictable movement. Like I could read the game well, I could hit shots, I could execute, but like my movement, I never really talked about this because you don't tell everybody what your weaknesses are. But you know, when I'm done playing professionally now, but like my movement was I thought my biggest shortcoming, and I've never really talked about this on stream before because you don't tell people like what you're good at, what you're not. But I felt like my movement was the thing I could improve the most as a player. I just never got the time to sit down and do it because at that point I was streaming, right?
Kind of marketing, right? Okay, so here's the rub. With every silver lining comes some sort of cloud, and movement mechanics are intimately intertwined with the other side of the coin. Okay, the AD strafing person themselves has to constantly correct their aim to be back over their target when they change direction. This is fine, like unless you're spamming your keys, you can pretty much learn to correct for your own movement. But the moment you think about, I guess, clicking on the tracer, you kind of see the complexity emerge. And now just imagine yourself in a like tracer versus tracer duel, and you need to dodge as well. Yeah. Learning to aim in Overwatch consists of more than one skill. You not only need to click
That's what also made it special,
but learn to predict your opponent's strafing patterns and learn to correct your own aiming patterns from your own movement. As well as that, if every character has to go from moving left to right in a single frame or two, the character animations need to flow seamlessly between these poses. Despite the animators doing everything they can to keep the game readable and clear for a viewer, this creates a lot of visual jank. In reality, the animation will only ever be able to do so much to keep up with the direction changes. If you've ever wondered why watching competitive Overwatch feels so messy and hard to follow, this is a really big reason that's honestly never spoke about. One example I use to explain the work the animations are doing and the muscle memory required to play the game is as follows. When a Zen and an Ashe crouches, which one's head moves more? If you know the answer to this, you have way too much ingrained knowledge about the animations in Overwatch. And I'm really going to bet that a large majority of this video's viewers actually know the answer. It's Zenyatta, by the way. This really is unique and sets Overwatch apart from most other games and isn't really understood
Zen has such a big
even by
hitbox,
the
I am lower
hardcore
anyway.
player base. For instance, when Valorant came out, there were so many articles and so many players somehow comparing this new tactical shooter game with Overwatch because...
I said this too. These games are completely different. The way they play, the way aiming works, like they're similar audiences from the esports perspective, but like the core games are just totally different. I'm glad somebody else has said this because anytime I saw that, I was like, you know what? No, like Valorant and Overwatch are very different. Like they're still competitors, but like they're very, very different.
Both games had abilities and ultimates, I guess. In reality, when we put the games side by side, you can see the difference instantly. Valorant requires you to lock your movement when shooting for accuracy, meaning that the fights are much more about precise aiming, crosshair positioning, reaction time, and tracking consistent movement patterns, whereas Overwatch requires, well, everything. Accuracy, precision, reaction, tracking, prediction, the list kind of keeps on going. If you just take the simple concept of tracking another character on, let's say, Soldier, and that person isn't interested in getting shot, the skill required are not only FPS mechanics, but on top of that, very similar to fighting games in the level of prediction needed. In high-level games, players literally are learning on the fly others' strafing patterns in order to correct for them and catch them out. I mean, look at this top 500 player literally shooting the ground with a Helix rocket, which is, by the way, quite a big projectile because it's just too hard to hit a Kiriko in front of them with a direct hit.
Is that an Overwatch as a whole problem, or is that a Kiriko design problem? This is my thing. Like, I don't like it's inaccurate to make a blatant statement on the entirety of Overwatch. I'm not saying he's doing this, but I've seen people do this about the game. When the reality is, it's only a couple of characters that had design flaws that should have gotten addressed that would have made this happen, right? Like, it's not an accurate assumption to put a blanket statement on the entirety of the cast because Kiriko is super skinny and had better dual potential and could TP out for free and do all that stuff. Like, no. We're not doing that one.
This is so far beyond what any other game on the market demands.
But also, like, aiming helixes low is a good idea because it can knock them up, right? And if you hit them in the leg or the head, it's the same amount of damage. So, like, you should do that. You should do that. You should do the same thing with echo stickies. That's why the ideal place to shoot the echo stickies is actually at like a 30 to 45 degree angle above, so that even if you miss them, they'll hit the ground right underneath the player and explode on them. But like so like that's a good angle to do with echo stickies. Like this is in general like a smart thing to do with projectiles.
At this point, you may be thinking something along the lines of like, yeah, sure, CS and Valorant obviously have more simple movement systems to concentrate on precise gunplay, blah, 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 blah. I bet this isn't uncommon for FPS to use this system. So let's just check off some games. Halo, Call of Duty, Quake, Apex, Fortnite, Tarkov, Titanfall, Paladins, Destiny, Battlefield, Splitgate, Insurgency? No? TF2 is the final game you might think would have almost instant acceleration, being the game Overwatch took direct inspiration from, but even here it's slower, and this small difference massively influences the gameplay and game feel. The actual games where the system exists in reality are things like Quake, Doom and Siege. In general, arena shooters and incredibly hardcore experiences whose target audiences are the top 5% of FPS players. In looking into Jeff Kaplan and many of the other teams' prior FPS experience, we find exactly that. Quake, Doom and Half-Life 1. And we also find very little
By the way, those FPS games were the top of charts of the list of the games he just listened to. Like, I hate to say it to Halo players, but Halo hadn't been great in years. Halo was so bad, they tried to give mouse and keyboard aim assist, right? That's the reality of it. Sorry on my Xbox. Listen, I was Team 362, man, but let's get real here.
Convert a previously undeveloped genre into a cash cow by giving the games a smoother learning curve, beautiful art styles which hold up for years, and pumping a hell of a lot of money into marketing. At this point, you might want to have a think about Blizzard's current installed player base in 2016. The games they currently have out are World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Heart of the Swarm, Hearthstone and Diablo. Most of these players from different genres tried Overwatch, didn't click with it, and assumed that it was because they don't like FPS games.
Greetings.
For some of them, obviously this is true, but we need to ask ourselves exactly how many of these players could have stayed within the system and actually paid money into Blizzard, but were turned off not by the fact that it's an FPS game, but by the fact that it's a harder FPS game than almost anything else on the market. This is even more important nowadays because the majority...
I don't know if that's fair to say. Because here's the thing with Overwatch, like, there are plenty of characters to play in the game, and frankly, these characters were stronger than a lot of the aim characters were, that allow you to bypass the actual shooter mechanic and still play the game and get tremendous value. Reinhardt, Winston, like Overwatch is the only FPS that lets players not be good at FPS games and still have options to get enormous value. I don't think you can make the claim that the reason why people didn't play Overwatch was because it was too hard of a shooter game to play, when it was the only shooter that had options, plenty of them, that gave you enormous value that weren't aim intensive. Mercy, Reinhardt, Winston, Torbjorn to some degree, right? With his turret, Mei with her freeze, Junkrat, right? Pharah is like a kind of more projectile based. I mean, you can just go down the list here of characters they continuously added to the game. I would say the opposite is true. What really hurt Overwatch was them adding characters that weren't about an FPS game. And you just have to point to Brigitte and what happened with Goats and how that really is what destroyed the league. Zarya, right? Diva, you know, like you can just go down the list. Like if you look at the characters they added, like a lot of them weren't aim intensive, except for the DPS ones, right? So I don't think you can't make this claim. You can't make this claim. I think he's wrong on the, like you just can't make that claim and back it up with the direction the game actually went. But I see what he's trying to say, and I'm not claiming him at all, but I just don't think that's a good claim to make.
FPS game than almost anything else on the market. This is even more important nowadays because the majority of Overwatch 2's player base is on console, and you have a massive pool of Switch players who literally are playing at 16 FPS. How low should the bar to entry be? Should a parent, a Switch player, or for instance a World of Warcraft player be able to interact with this game if they have basic competency with the control scheme? This is the trade-off. How low should the bar be set? The natural response this discussion receives is that Overwatch is uniquely accommodating to the unskilled player base because there's alternative characters that don't even demand that you ever interact with the aiming system. Mercy is one of the most one-trick heroes in the game, and this is a large part of the reason. But there's a fine line between allowing players to choose to interact with the aiming system if they want to, and forcing players into a self-quarantine from the FPS elements due to the massive task in onboarding. If a Switch player picks up the game and happens to luck into or look up a low aiming skill character, and so can interact with the systems, they are basically forced to only use this small subset of characters in perpetuity until they learn to use the controls. And just quarantining players hasn't been a smooth solution, even in the limited way that it succeeds, because Blizzard have always struggled to balance characters with a low aiming skill floor. A couple of characters like Moira.
Maybe. I think people are going to pick what they want to pick no matter what, and we've learned that, right? Like, Ana, like, let me look at Overbuff right now. So, we can go console, all, like, Ana's the second most picked on console. Genji's the third most picked, and these are two of the most... Widowmaker's the fifth most picked, and these three are all aim-intensive characters, right? So, I think people are going to pick what they want to pick. Ironically, the three least picked characters on console are the three new tank heroes, funny enough. I think Overwatch has plenty of options, and I don't think that people, I don't know, like let's look at bronze. Let's look at the lowest ranks. Still the same. Mercy, Ana, Genji, Diva, Moira, Widow, Soldier, Lucio. Like there are those options, and ironically, all of these aim heroes in bronze, as they should, have negative win rates, because again, when people are, except for Zen, Jesus, just goes to show you, right? Just goes to show you, man. Yeah, interesting claim. I think the heroes that get picked would disprove that, though.
A couple of characters like Moira and Lightweaver have pretty much no skill ceiling because
they were really good. First of all, Moira's good right now. There's a big perception that Moira is a bad character, and she can be depending on the meta. The reason why that perception is there is because the people that actually grind Moira, like, are players who just frankly aren't as good 9 out of 10 times, right? They're playing Moira because they aren't as good. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's just kind of true, because the better players have picked up what heroes and decided to learn them instead. Kiriko, Ana, Zenyatta, right? And so it's not that there's no skill ceiling for these characters or a place for them to actually fit in the game. There absolutely is a place for them to fit in the game. It's just the people just choose not to play it because they have better options. Moira's survivability has always been insane. It's only continued to get buffed more and more, which is why the second support sustain isn't like hard meta. You'll see her get picked the second Zen gets nerfed here, and she's actually pretty good in deathball comps, right? Weaver was buffed so hard that he was dominating games at high level play in Season 7 to the point where fights were lasting longer than double shield. The issue is not the character. It's the type of player that the character attracts isn't meant to get to the skill ceiling, because they aren't actually going through the rigorous parts of the game that teach you how to be good, because your hero allows you to climb without actually having to learn any of those things. So when you put a player like Rack Attack on Weaver, or myself on Weaver, we're going to pick that up a lot faster than somebody who's only playing these low skill characters because they've never actually pushed themselves properly to try to get better. So I wouldn't say these heroes don't have a skill ceiling. It does depend on the patch, and they have been nerfed pretty heavily. But there absolutely have been those metas that exist.
Because they've been given no way to control the game, and are hated in low ranks.
Weaver has a way to control the game.
In the absence of being given other strengths, they've just been made impossible to kill. A couple of characters like Torbjorn and Symmetra have been reworked, and now all the players who want to use these characters as safe havens to avoid the hard as nails aiming system have been outright left out to dry.
Torb is S tier this season. Torb is S tier this season. This Torb rework has made him more viable in more situations. They increased Torb's projectile spies. They buffed his shotgun. Sim, sure, but she was a horrible pick at the skill ceiling. And after they reworked her, she actually found a place in the game at the skill ceiling. Sim probably shouldn't auto lock on players either, you know? He's a little bit wrong when it comes to the actual game design, at least at the ceiling. When he's making claims about the ceiling, he might be right about the skill floor. I'm not trying to deny what he's saying about the skill floor, but the ceiling is not entirely accurate, in my personal opinion.
At this point, the DPS category simply just has no I don't want to click on things.
Sim was great in
heroes.
6v6.
A couple of characters as well, like Winston, Brig, and D.Va, have specifically been noob trapped since the game's launch, because they present towards the consumer as easy to pick up and learn in heroes.
Brig has not been a skill trap. Brig's done the opposite. Brig has been OP,
Jeff
but...
Kaplan.
How's it going? I'm Jeff.
Again, I've talked about this for years. Brig is the most misleading character in the entire game, especially for new players. There's a reason why my Brig guide has 200k views, and the comments are unanimous. Holy shit, I never knew what Inspire did. I picked this character and I climbed 3 ranks immediately. Brig isn't that. Like, they never displayed Inspire. She baits low rank players to go in and int, but when you actually sit down for an hour and learn the secret sauce of the character and attempt to study it at any degree, you get the most immediate value out of any character in the entire game. She has the highest win rate across every character in every rank. She is the only hero I think that has a positive win rate in every rank. And even when Mauga was broken and pay to win, her win rates across every rank were still higher than his. Think about that for a second. Pay to and play to win Mauga had lower win rates across every rank than Brigitte did. Let me let him say what he said again.
Like Winston, Brig, and D.Va, have specifically been noob trapped since the game's launch, because they present towards
Winston
the
had one of the
consumer
highest skill ceilings
as
of the
easy.
game. Winston had one of the highest skill ceilings of the game. So I would not say that they're noob traps. I think they're well-designed characters because you can play them at a low level and then continue to play them all the way to the high level. Heroes like that were what made Overwatch 1 win Game of the Year and be one of the greatest FPS games of all time. I wouldn't say they're noob traps. Winston's not a noob trap at all. Winston, you could play in Bronze, and then you could play him through GM. It's a perfectly designed character because he involves a lot of decision-making and execution.
Easy to pick up and learn in hero design and gameplay loop, but they have such a massively hard positioning requirement that they actually present a concealed massive game sense skill in onboarding.
In 5v5,
There's really no questioning it. It's become a lot
Winston.
harder to exist inside Overwatch without clicking on things. And when I come home from a 10-hour day at work, I don't necessarily want to have to compete in a massive game sense skill in onboarding. There's really no questioning it. It's become a lot harder to exist inside Overwatch without clicking on things. And when I come home from a 10-hour day at work, I don't necessarily want to have to compete in aiming skill against teenagers who play every day without fail whilst hyped up on vape pens and glue. The good news is
that's not what happened to Overwatch. What happened to Overwatch is that the easy brain dead characters overwhelmed skill and the aiming requirement, and no matter how much you shot things, nothing died. Double shield, goats, season 7 double shield or single shield sustain meta, right? Even season 8 last season. The reality is, like, aim got less and less important in this game unless it was burst damage because of the easy characters that you're claiming getting override abilities to all of the big plays that could be made. And the new heroes that came out were super over-kitted constantly over and over again, and they didn't play by the same rules as the original cast. Whereas Winston used to be able to go and dive something and get direct reward because Brig and Bap couldn't sustain the whole team, and even if you made the proper play, you would get punished for it. You can make the right play against immortality abilities and get punished for it. That's what changed in the game. Your gameplay loop that rewarded you went from this used to reward you to now you die for making what used to be the proper play in the game. And that never should have been the case. You want to maintain the gameplay loops for these characters, but add different ways in the same rule set, right? And that's where Overwatch went wrong. So to say it's because these kids are sweating and aiming when DPS has been the weakest role in the game for 4 or 5 years, undoubtedly, aside from Echo in Overwatch 1, DPS was the weakest, easily the weakest role in the game since even GOATS meta. What broke Overwatch was not god tier aimers dominating the game. It was this insane sustain and bailout abilities on support that denied value from the proper plays just by existing, and that took away what was special about the playmaking in the game, made it so much harder to make plays in general, and that's what people were feeling frustrated about.
Blizzard has clearly always been in some way aware of this problem with onboarding into the aiming system, and have done their best to reduce aiming skill whilst keeping their movement system. But there's a really big problem here for Blizzard. Like, what do you do if you realize the fundamentals of the game feel fundamentally are just intimately tied to making the game inaccessible to the primary target audience? I think the only real answer here is the cat's out of the bag in terms of changing it. 99% of players couldn't even pinpoint the acceleration as a factor if you put a gun to their head. So if Blizzard wanted...
Maybe it's because the acceleration was never the biggest problem of the game.
Decrease the acceleration at all, it wouldn't be possible without massive uproar and confusion. So the only other thing they can do is what they've done. Unilateral projectile size increases. I think this is genuinely the most forward-thinking move the development team has ever made to the core gameplay of Overwatch. And this might be the only way they can fix an issue baked into the game at the point of conception 7 years ago. But with every silver lining, yeah. You know when everyone called Hanzo's arrows logs? Like, they still do it, and it's been...
Yeah, it's almost like when his projectile sizes were massive back in the day, that was the most complained about thing in the game, but...
4 years since they've been changed? 5 years? It's gotta be like 5 years. They weren't even that large beforehand. Hitbox sizes are another thing.
Also, I'm gonna talk about this in a second when he's done. He might not be entirely wrong, but like the conclusions he's going to back his points, some of them are wrong.
And despite how positive this change may be, I'm worried. Unfortunately, the other system here is, well, another one Switch players already really struggle against. It's lag compensation. Overwatch naturally favors the shooter, as any FPS game should, so if they hit on their screen, they get the kill. This obviously affects console users and therefore Wi-Fi users a lot more. If two hitboxes come into contact with each other, the bullet hits. So the effect is to essentially draw another bubble around the Michelin Man the distance away of the radius of the projectile size. Overwatch hitboxes were already very damn large, and they're becoming even larger. Maybe the Hanzo log arrow was really impactful in the mind of players because it was a ranged instant kill. I don't know where this one will land, and this is one problem I can't blame the current devs for. They're just trying to fix what is probably a mistake made 7 years ago. Will the downside outweigh the upside here? Will the game be in a better state? I guess we gotta wait for time to tell. Comment below on what you think the outcome's gonna be, because I'm pretty much at a loss here.
So let's break it down what he's saying here. Number one, can't design the entirety of this game around the fucking Switch. The reality is the Switch is not a device made for this kind of game. That's just the truth. Maybe the reason, I think, man, okay. But to be fair to him, he is neutral and he's just kind of talking about the issue. This is the aim assist patch, is what it is. It's meant to get casual players. Is it balanced at all? Hell no. Not even close to balance, right? Like I said about this patch, it would be a great April Fool's patch, right? It's art and science, right? Overwatch has never had an issue of getting people to come back to the game. Overwatch 2 proved that, right? Everybody will come back and try the game. Overwatch's issue has always been trying to get players to stay, and how to make them stay. An unbalanced game where your picks feel much more forced rather than picking what you want to play, which is what players have shown what they want to do. Probably a more organic way to go about that, right? Hanzo's logs became complained about a lot more, not because of the acceleration of the game that's been the same forever, but it's almost like when you remove a second tank that was all about damage mitigation and don't nerf the damage values to stop one-shots or anything like that, one-shots and burst damage are going to become more prevalent, especially when you've continued to add characters to the support role that can deny burst impact with ease, right? So that made people lean more into these heroes like Hanzo in Overwatch 2, and especially in Brawl. Outside of any meta that's not hard dive, like those heroes just became really, really good to play because they were the only way to actually get through it. I'm not necessarily against them slightly increasing hitboxes, right, to make it better for the player. I'm not necessarily against that. I think the degree to which they did it was way too much, right? And that should get to now, but again, that's art. Right? Like Overwatch, the Overwatch dev team has never been good at the science. To be frank, they've clearly never understood the science. Look at a hero like Brig. Look at what goats happen. Like, look at all this stuff. They've never understood it, right? They are about art. They make the game look beautiful. They create beautiful characters, beautiful skins, and beautiful atmospheres for you to experience Overwatch in a different way. This team is a 10 out of 10 when it comes to art, but a 3 out of 10 when it comes to science. So what this patch is, it's art. It's art, and here my channel's about science, right? People watch me for the science of the game. They don't come here to watch me talk about the beautifully drawn stories or the well-designed characters and what this means in the storyline. No, like people come here to see the science of the game, and I know this, and I talk about this constantly. So when it comes to talking about the actual art of things, it's not my strong suit, and I know this, but I would be remiss to not acknowledge the art of what this patch is. And it's going to work in the short term. But the long-term consequences to the science, which is what makes people come back and play day in, day out, are going to be very, very negative. Like you shouldn't get rewarded for missing. That's just the reality of it. You should not get rewarded for missing. The movement options of Overwatch were never the problem. The problem was that they added little heroes like Kiriko that had better dual potential than the DPS, could 2-tap, TP through walls, make everyone invulnerable, and that character overrided everything that people did. The same with Immortality Field. The same with Moira being able to heal the entire team easily, right? His point where he said, like, I don't want to come home and have to aim sweat against these kids. Like, that's never been Overwatch's problem. There's never been a game with more options that were better than aiming against the hardcore aimers. So your statement about, and I think this is a good video to be clear, like generally, I think he didn't really have a big opinion. He just kind of covered things holistically, which was interesting. But the opinion that, what is it then, right? Because aimers were never complained about characters in this game. The problem was that a hero like Winston was that, like, you could no longer positionally punish players who made the mistake with their brain because the MOs would easily bail them out. Like, Overwatch is a difficult game to aim in, but it's not because people who have bad aim, like, can't hit shots. It's because there's so many denial things in the game. There's so much more to the game than just aiming. That is why Overwatch is like aim doesn't reward you. It's not that people can't hit shots. It's that there's so much more to learn about the game because it's a beautiful game that did a great job of encompassing all of these things. Positioning, game knowledge, cooldown exchange, aiming, all of those things. Then do you know what they did? Every hero played by the same rules, and once you learn how to master that gameplay loop, you can be good at any of the characters. And then what did they do to the gameplay loop? Oh, you're going to do everything right, but here's this immortality ability on a 30-second cooldown that denies everything that you do, even though we talked to you this was the right way to play the game for years. But we're going to reward this player who doesn't have any mechanical skill, who's going to sit down and press one button, and all of those years of knowledge of you making the proper play, yeah, well, now you're going to do everything right, outplay everybody, but you're not going to get any value, and actually we're going to punish you, and you're going to die for making the right play. That was Overwatch's problem. It's never been the acceleration. It's never been any of this shit, right? This is almost like, I would describe this patch as the ultimate gaslight. We said, and I backed it up, that Overwatch was not going to become like Call of Duty. I was wrong. This is the Call of Duty patch. This is what Activision Blizzard does. They take these crazy games and they make them simple and easy via aim assist or anything like this over time. This is Overwatch's equivalent of aim assist. This is the casualifying of the game. And that just might be the direction it goes. I'm not necessarily saying that's right or wrong, right? I will say for game balance and skill to reward, it's a little bit interesting. And DPS is by far the most powerful role in the game right now, and unfortunately that comes at the expense of the support. This is the COD patch. And like Overwatch will still be Overwatch, but they are Call of Duty-fying this game. If you look at what they did to Call of Duty, they're doing the same thing here. That's why I stopped playing Warzone personally. And I'm not trying to say that in a way where it's like flaming the devs either, to be clear. I'm just making an observation. I don't necessarily have a big opinion because the reality is people came back and played the game, whether that was for the new rank system or many different things. But back to this video, he got some stuff right. I think a lot of the claims were wrong. The onboarding process, I think, for Overwatch is fine. Again, it is a more difficult game to pick up and aim on, but there's so many options for characters out there that you can pick to get around that it's just that's never been a real issue. The acceleration is interesting. And its acceleration is what makes it unique. Yeah. Interesting. I don't know. I don't think the game's issues... If the argument is that acceleration broke Overwatch, that could not be more incorrect. Could not be more incorrect. So, interesting video. Good subjects. If people are trying to say this, like this saves the game, it won't, because again, like it doesn't solve the counter swapping 5v5 brought in. I think if this was in 6v6, it'd be an interesting conversation. But what makes the game feel so good right now is not the fact that it's easier to hit shots. It's that DPS is actually more powerful than support for the first time in years. So, yeah, we'll move it on here. I'm going to take a piss, chat. Any other